Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you here today for obviously this really important joint briefing between Caabu and War and Want. My name is Joseph Willets, and I am Caabu's Head of Parliamentary Affairs. And obviously this event today is on the escalation in torture against Palestinians. We're really privileged to be able to be hosting two brilliant organisations in Addameer and Defense for Children International, Palestine. And we've also really long valued all the vital work that both of these organisations have been doing under sustained attacks and an ever worsening situation for Palestinians living under brutal occupation and apartheid. Not least, I think, given that both organisations were among the six that the previous Israeli government falsely designated as part of their sustained and systematic campaign against Palestinian civil society and those speaking out against occupation, apartheid and countless human rights abuses, including the detention and torture of Palestinians, including children. Obviously, this event comes at a time of absolute horror and devastation in Gaza, and the scenes, devastation, death and decay we've seen from Shifa Hospital in the past days is a grim and gruesome reminder of 6 months of horror for Palestinians in Gaza and why Israel stands accused of genocide. Palestinians have been documenting these horrors and demanding action for months, and we continue to collectively fail them. Organisations like Caabu War and Want, who we're really proud to be partnering with this afternoon, are playing our part, not least in a climate of political spinelessness and failure to act and to further dehumanise Palestinians. I think this event will also reflect on decades of dehumanisation of Palestinians in the context of torture and detention. Addameer and another organisation, Adala, who aren't with us today, but also value their incredible work too, recently spoke with parliamentarians about the issue of torture against Palestinians. Such issues, in particular with regard to detention of Palestinians, especially children, have long been part of our advocacy work here at Caabu. On parliamentary delegations, we have worked with both Addameer and DCI Palestine. We have visited Israel's military courts in occupied Palestinian territory and seen this horrendous kangaroo process in action. We've also met with former child detainees and heard their experiences from arrests in the middle of the night, torture, the so-called legal process that follows, and then the consequences afterwards of coming to terms with having been through that process. Politicians can't say they don't know, and we will continue to raise such issues. We're really pleased to welcome Tala Nasir from Addameer, Miranda Cleland from Defense for Children International, and Neil Sammonds from War and Want, I've had the pleasure of travelling with in his previous capacity at Medical Aid for Palestinians on some of these delegations. So firstly, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Tala Nasir. And so Tala is a human rights lawyer at Addameer, and she holds a master's degree in law from Birzeit University. Tala, thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Joseph, for this introduction. Just like Joseph said, my name is Tala Nasir. I'm a lawyer working with Addameer. We at Addameer work with Palestinian political prisoners. We provide free legal aid for Palestinian political prisoners. We monitor and document the violations committed against them. We raise awareness regarding the prisoners' issue. We also advocate for their rights locally and internationally. I'll start with a brief overview regarding the situation right now in Israeli prisons and the massive arrest campaigns still taking place after October 7th, because the situation got really horrible after October 7th. This doesn't mean that it was better before. Since 76 years of this occupation, Palestinian prisoners have been subjected to different forms of torture and ill treatment and different crimes committed against them. But yes, these crimes intensified after October 7th. The Israeli occupation forces started conducting massive arrest campaigns in the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem. They have arrested more than 8,000 Palestinians until this day, including more than 250 women, more than 500 children, in addition to 64 journalists, and of course, in addition to the elderly and men. The Israelis are targeting everyone, particularly human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, and of course, former prisoners. And they are using two main policies, let's say, to incarcerate the largest possible number of Palestinians behind Israeli bars. The first policy and a crime is the administrative detention policy. They've been using this policy for years ago, but now the numbers are unprecedented. 80% of the 8,000 Palestinians who were detained after October 7th were transferred to administrative detention. The current number of administrative detainees has reached 3,600 administrative detainees, which is an unprecedented number. The second, and of course, the administrative detention, where they can hold Palestinians without presenting any charges against them and without any trial. The second policy they are using against Palestinians is charging Palestinians on charges of incitement, which means that if you post anything on your social media platforms, on your personal social media platform, and which gives or has words of sympathy with the children of Gaza, for example, you might be arrested because of that. So, and they are targeting journalists with this charge of incitement. And you can be held in prison for up to 2 years because you posted anything on your social media which they claim is you are indicting against the Israeli occupation. Of course, these two policies and others are used aiming to silence the Palestinians, preventing them from raising their voices against the genocide still taking place in Gaza, against the crimes taking place in the occupied territories. Now, regarding the situation in prisons right now, it's important to note that since October 7th, the Israeli occupation have isolated the prisoners from each other. They isolated them from the outside world. They completely banned lawyers from meeting with the prisoners for the first 2 weeks. They are still banning the International Committee of the Red Cross from visiting the Israeli prison. Of course, family visits were cut off. Like families cannot visit their loved ones now in prison for more than 6 months. They closed the canteen inside the prisons, and they only provided and still provide Palestinian prisoners with 2 poor quality and quantity meals. And this led to the prisoners losing an average of 15 to 20 kilograms of their weight until this moment. They also reduced the water supply to 1 hour per day. They prevented and banned prisoners from going out to the yard, to the recreational time yard. They are denying prisoners medical care, and there are several cases who are suffering from severe medical issues such as cancer. This is in addition to the raids on the prisoners' cells from the Israeli special forces. They brutally beat prisoners in different prisons. They ill-treated them, and this torture and ill-treatment led to the killing of 14 Palestinian political prisoners inside Israeli prisons within 6 months. This number is also unprecedented. The Israeli occupation authorities opened an investigation regarding 5 cases, and they conducted the autopsy examination to these 5 cases. And the initial autopsy reports confirm and show that they were brutally beaten. They have bruises all over their bodies. They were internally bleeding, and they had fractures in different parts of their bodies, which led to their killing. So now we are waiting for the completion of this investigation, but we've been working for more than 30 years with the Israeli authorities, and we've been submitting different complaints regarding many violations committed against the prisoners, and 99% the Israeli authorities close the investigation, claiming there is no evidence. So we are afraid this is going to happen this time. So all what I've said is regarding the Israeli prisons under the responsibility of the Israeli Prison Service, and the massive arrest campaigns taking place in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem. Now, regarding the situation in the Gaza Strip and the detainees from the Gaza Strip, it's really, the situation is really alarming, because We only know that the Israelis, after the ground invasion, have been conducting massive arrest campaigns against Gazan, the Gazans. They arrested thousands of Gazan detainees. Unfortunately, and until this day, we have no information about their names, their whereabouts, the conditions and situations they are held in the military camps, because the Israeli authorities after October 7th announced the opening of 2 military camps to hold Gazan detainees. One military camp is called Addameer, and it's in the south. The other is called Anatot, and it's near Jerusalem. And they announced that they opened these military camps to hold Gazan detainees. Until this day, we are banned from visiting any of these military camps. The ICRC is still banned from visiting these military camps. Many missing Palestinians and forcibly disappeared Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, we are now documenting. Many families are trying to reach out to Addameer to ask for any information regarding where are their children and loved ones. We've been trying to contact and ask the Israeli authorities to disclose any information regarding Gazan detainees, but unfortunately, they are not responding at all. The only way we know about the conditions and everything happening inside these military camps is from the Israeli media. Many Haaretz articles, Haaretz is an Israeli newspaper. They've published like 3 to 4 articles regarding the situation in these military camps, and especially in Addameer military camp. And one of the articles revealed that more than 27 Gazan detainees have been killed inside these military camps. And until this day, we as lawyers and the families of the detainees do not know anything about the names of the killed Palestinians or the situation behind their killing. So it's really terrible that we cannot get any information about Gazan detainees. They are forcibly disappeared, and this is really alarming. And yes, we've documented many crimes committed against released detainees from Gaza. Yes, we have a problem reaching out to the released prisoners because of the genocide still taking place, but we've managed to document some of these. They've told us that they are 24/7 handcuffed and blindfolded. They have to stay on their knees only. They only give them a mattress, a very thin mattress, only for 4 hours, and then they take it back. So they cannot sleep only for 4 hours. This is in addition, of course, to the brutal beatings and torture committed against them. Just today, the Israeli Haaretz newspaper also revealed that different forms of torture is committed against Gazan detainees in Addameer camp, which led to that the doctors had to cut off some parts of the bodies, like the legs and hands, for the Gazan detainees, because they are 24/7 handcuffed, and this led, and of course they are also cuffed in their feet. So this led to the blood something, and then they had to cut out the hand or the feet for the detainees. So we're only knowing this from the Israeli media and still don't know anything else regarding the situation. One other important thing to note is that the Israeli authorities are using laws as a weapon of war. So they declared the state of emergency at first. They allowed the overcrowding in the prisons within this emergency state. So they issued an emergency regulation that states that, yes, we can, we allow the overcrowding inside prison cells. And now half of the prisoners sleep on mattresses on the floor. And we're talking about, like before, it was fixed in the same cell. Now it's doubled. It's 12 in the same cell. And of course, there is no space for them to even walk inside this cell. And they, just like I mentioned, they cannot go outside of their cell because of the emergency state. Regarding the administrative detention, they amended the law, allowing bringing the detainee to the judicial review session within 12 days. Before it was 8 days. And they also extended the issuance of an administrative detention order from 72 hours to 144 hours for all administrative detainees. So, and this is, of course, in order to incarcerate the largest possible number of Palestinians in the most easiest way. So they are giving themselves time to incarcerate more Palestinians. The other amendment, which is really important, is the amendment on the unlawful combatant law. So the Israelis are applying the unlawful combatant law against Gazan detainees. This law is similar to the administrative detention law, which is they are detaining Gazan detainees without presenting any charges against them. But what is important in this law, that which they amended, is that they allowed the ban of meeting the detainee's lawyer for up to 180 days, which means 6 months. We as lawyers cannot meet with a detainee which is designated as an unlawful combatant. So this, of course, is to to impose further torture and ill treatment against Gazan detainees without letting us as lawyers and banning us from monitoring and documenting these crimes, because like after 6 months, all the bruises all over the bodies will be removed and erased. So this is the main aim of amending this unlawful combatant law. This is in a brief. I'm ready to answer any of your questions, but first, let me tell you that we at Addameer are launching a campaign, and we're starting to launch it today with you to address the Israeli authorities and let them be aware that they will be held accountable for all their crimes. It's an urgent call for action for everyone, for free people of the world, to send 2 messages to the Israeli Military Central Command, which issues and signs the administrative detention orders. And the other message has to be sent to the head of the Israeli Prison Service, because he is fully responsible about the crimes taking place inside Israeli prisons. I will now put, I tried to put the Word document in the chat. I couldn't do so. So I will put the call for action now in the chat, and we hope that all of you be part and take part in this important campaign. And of course, you can share it with anyone you think would be would like to participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tala. We will be able to, I mean, in email afterwards, we'll send to everybody that is part of the call and those that couldn't make it. So we'll also, anything that Tala, Miranda, and Neil wants to get sent across, we can do that. Thank you so much for that very harrowing kind of account, very thorough and harrowing account, and for speaking with us today. A reminder as well that do continue to put questions in the chat, and we will get to those after our 3 speakers have all spoken. Now hand over to Miranda Cleland. So Miranda is Advocacy Officer for Defense for Children International Palestine, where she advocates for the human rights of Palestinian children. Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you so much, Tala, for that great overview and introduction. We have so much admiration for the work that Addameer does, and yeah, for all of the important advocacy and documentation that you're carrying out, especially now. Thank you also to Joe from Caabu and Neil from War on Want for hosting this important webinar ahead of Palestinian Children's Day, which is actually tomorrow. My name is Miranda Cleland. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm an advocacy officer at Defense for Children International Palestine. We provide legal aid to children who have been detained by the Israeli military. We document human rights violations against children with a focus on detention, torture, and fatalities. And we also engage in local and international advocacy to advance children's rights and push for accountability. It has been clear for a very long time that Israeli forces routinely and systematically target Palestinian children, and they are emboldened to do so as the international community, led by the West, particularly the United States and the UK, allows Israeli forces to act with complete impunity and with no consequence for the actions that they take. Each year, Israeli forces detain, interrogate, torture, prosecute, and imprison around 500 to 700 Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank. These children, almost all boys, are between the ages of 12 and 17. Under international law, a child is any person under the age of 18, and under Israeli military law, the age of criminal responsibility is 12. So when we're talking about children detained and tortured by the Israeli military in the occupied West Bank, we're mostly talking about boys between the ages of 12 and 17, and most of those are on the older side, 16 and 17-year-olds. I'll add that we certainly have documented cases where Israeli forces detain and harass children who are younger than 12 as well. Since October, I think everybody knows that Israeli forces have really dramatically escalated their military campaigns throughout the occupied West Bank, carrying out military incursions into Palestinian communities nearly every night. This was the case before October. Last year, we were already seeing really record numbers of military incursions and child fatalities well before October, but I mean, things escalated so dramatically in October. As Tala mentioned, we believe Israeli forces have detained somewhere around 500 Palestinian children since October alone, which is a huge increase compared to average numbers from past years. Excuse me. And from what we've heard from child detainees, conditions in Israeli prisons are worse than ever before. Part of our work with DCIP is documenting the experiences of Palestinian children detained by the Israeli military, and by doing so, we're able to piece together what happens to most children most of the time. So I'll walk you through kind of what that looks like. About 60% of these children are detained from their homes by Israeli forces in the middle of the night. That looks like Israeli soldiers showing up to a family's home at 2 or 3 in the morning, bursting through the door and waking everybody up. The child is dragged out of his bedroom, and at that moment, about 75% of children experience some form of physical violence at the hands of Israeli soldiers. They are kicked, slapped, punched, struck with a soldier's gun or helmet, or otherwise beaten. Then the soldiers force the child into the back of an Israeli military vehicle and take them away. Remember at this point that the child's parents have no idea where he's being taken, why, or when they'll see him again. The child will spend anywhere from 10 minutes to many hours in transit, usually blindfolded with hands bound behind his back. When the child arrives at an Israeli interrogation center, which are often located within Israel or within illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, 80% of children will be strip searched before an adult Israeli interrogator questions him for hours with the goal of coercing a confession. Interrogations are designed to be very coercive, and children regularly report being beaten, insulted, forced into stress positions, and worse. As part of the interrogation, in about 1 in 4 cases, Israeli interrogators will place a child into solitary confinement for the purpose of eliciting a confession. On average, once a child is placed into solitary confinement, the average amount of time that he'll spend there is about 16 days. Of course, this is an experience that's incredibly psychologically harmful. Many children who spend time in solitary confinement report anxiety and depression, and DCIP has documented cases where children self-harm and even try to commit suicide while in solitary confinement. We collected some testimonies from several Palestinian boys released from Israeli military custody as part of the prisoner exchange agreement at the end of November. And one of these boys was isolated in solitary confinement for an astounding 31 days. Another child spent more than a year in Israeli military custody before Israeli forces isolated him in solitary confinement for 30 days, during which he attempted suicide, just before being transferred back to the juvenile section of the prison. This child was released during the prisoner exchange, but was recently rearrested by Israeli forces in February, right after Israeli forces killed his older brother. To our knowledge, he remains in Israeli military custody. I probably don't have to tell you that solitary confinement, particularly for children, and especially when it's used as a tool to extract a confession, amounts to torture. It goes without saying that solitary confinement has an enormous psychological impact on any person, but especially a child during important stages of physical, psychological, and emotional development. We often hear from parents that their children who spent time in solitary confinement, that they are not the same child as before. These are children who continue to deal with anxiety, depression. Many of them never want to be alone ever again. They always want to be surrounded by people. Some continue to contemplate suicide, and many children released from Israeli military detention drop out of school, as it's very difficult to reintegrate and catch up on their education after such a dramatic and often prolonged interruption. I focused my comments on the experience of Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank in military detention, as DCIP has documented these cases for years, and the system has proved to be very consistent. The reports and testimonies that we've collected from children over the years overall have been extremely consistent in the types of ill treatment, detention, and rights violations that they report. Tala discussed this as well, and I also wanted to just briefly discuss that in the last 6 months, we've heard numerous reports of Palestinians, including many children, detained from Gaza by Israeli forces, most likely to military camps or other detention centers in southern Israel. And I want to emphasize how alarming it is that there's absolutely no information on the number of children, their location, their conditions, how they're being treated, when they'll be released, nothing. And we know how Israeli forces treat Palestinian children in broad daylight. And it is extremely disturbing to consider how they are treating children in the dark, with no transparency or access to lawyers, no access to the ICRC, no access to human rights organizations or their families. Israel has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is an international treaty whereby states commit to uphold the rights of children, one of which asserts that children should only be deprived of their liberty as a measure of last resort. I think it is beyond clear that instead, Israeli forces deprive Palestinian children of their liberty as a first resort with no consequence. Thank you all very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions once we get to the question section.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for that very thorough account as well. And obviously, the harrowing details that you're speaking of in terms of what Palestinian minors, young people face in this process. Now pass over to Neil Sammonds. So Neil is War and Want's senior campaigner on Palestine, and he previously worked with Incl for Palestinians and Amnesty International, during which time he carried out extensive research on torture. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Joe. And yeah, thanks to everyone at Caabu, as well as my colleagues at War and Want, and most of all to Miranda and her colleagues at DCI Palestine, and Tala and all of her colleagues at Addameer. I've still got hair on my arms and skin standing up after listening to Miranda's talk and hearing Tala before that on the kind of the weaponization of the law against detainees and Palestinians more widely, and much of the abuse which have taken place. Yeah, excuse me, but I'm going to continue the harrowing theme. I'm going to focus a bit more on methods of torture being perpetrated against Palestinians, and we'll look a bit about how that sits internationally and regionally, think about why and how it takes place, and then move us hopefully towards also a conversation about what we can try to do. Yeah, and just as a reminder, in my time at Amnesty, I conducted literally hundreds of interviews of victim survivors of torture, mostly in Syria and around Syria after they were displaced, as well as in Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Bahrain, Egypt, and Iraq, and a number of those were victims of the so-called US-led war on terror. I would say at the start that the Policies and practices employed by Israel are not, of course, those which the UK, the government, should claim to be a good friend of. These are more the practices and policies of what should be more of a pariah state, but we'll come back to that later. So in my amnesty days, we documented more than 30 methods of torture employed by the Syrian regime, both under Hafez and his son Bashar, against Syrians and others in the country, which included Palestinians. A large number of those we also see being employed by Israel. I'm going to go through some of the broader categories of that. As has been mentioned by both Miranda and Tala, the beatings are in many ways kind of the first and last, where it kind of stops and where it ends, including of children, men, women, by fists, feet, rifle butts, metal bars, including metal bars in cages. Some have said that at times children return to cells unrecognizable to those who'd seen them previously before they're taken away. And yes, at least 5 of those who've died in Israeli prisons since October are believed to have been beaten to death. This is very similar to what we saw the Syrian regime doing, arbitrary severe beatings to death of people, particularly those who might possibly dare to oppose the regime there. We heard about isolation, incommunicado detention, when people are kept away from families, lawyers, visits from monitoring bodies, including the ICRC. That is both a form of torture and ill treatment, and it is also the conditions in which more torture takes place. So it's an accelerator also of torture. Even harder, of course, when people are in solitary confinement, which can be for days, weeks, months, even years. Tala spoke about even more information than I'd heard about the consequences of prolonged handcuffing. So this should be for a very short period, like during a moment of arrest and perhaps transit to a detention center. But in Israel at the moment, or against Palestinian detainees, it's very prolonged. It's almost permanent. There's even, you may have seen clips of an 82-year-old woman with dementia, with these kind of open wounds, like scars on her wrists. No one is immune to this. And yes, we hear that from 5 in the morning till midnight, detainees are kept on their knees and not able to move. Also in those circumstances, there's denials of some of the basic necessities and needs. Going to a toilet prevented. Imagine the consequences and the difficulties of that. As said, having air, going for a walk, seeing daylight, women not being allowed menstruation pads, being denied water, having loud music blared at you to make it even harder to rest, to sleep, and being not allowed to pray. The humiliations are widespread. These include being, being urinated on, being given urine to drink, being forced to imitate an animal, behave like an animal, to do so perhaps in front of an Israeli flag, to do other things in front of an Israeli flag, to sing Israeli songs. And of course, if the person refuses or doesn't do it in the way that the jailers or soldiers, officials, or others like, then they are, of course, beaten. Frequently, there are threats of beatings, killings, rape to the person themselves and to their family members. We heard accounts of people being taken away, believing they were about to be executed, and then they're kicked and taken back to the cell. There's sexual humiliation. There's lots of this. You would have seen some of the pictures of people stripped to their underpants, taken away on lorries, paraded in the street, paraded in what's Yarmouk football stadium in Gaza, of people crammed together naked, including women stripped, groped, men beaten and boys beaten and touched in their genitals. The UN experts reported how they know that Israeli forces have also taken pictures of women in naked, degrading circumstances, and they have shared those photos amongst themselves. Even worse, on to rape. The UN experts report, which is in the document that Caabu and War and Want put together, includes a link to that. They have recorded 2 rapes of Palestinian women in Israeli custody. We can assume there's more. And also of at least 2 men reportedly raped by a foreign instrument. This is reported as being a hot metal instrument, possibly electrified, inserted into the anus. Sorry for the detail. At least 1 detainee has died from that. What a horrific death. This is also a method which was used by the Syrian regime. There was something called al-Abd al-Aswad, the black slave, awful name, used against opponents of the regime. And it's not new. Remember, you might have seen the US State Department or former State Department official Josh Paul, who resigned, saying that they had received information about a 15-year-old boy who had been detained at Al-Moskabiyya detention center, and he was raped there. They believed it was credible information, and this just led to harassment of the NGO who had reported on this. And going back into Lebanon, an individual there, Mustafa Darani, said that he was raped by Israelis, both by a wooden stick, and sodomized by a soldier as well. There's other, let's call them creative forms, setting dogs on detainees. That includes children, and that includes forcing a detainee into a cage and putting an attack dog in there to attack the detainee. Electric shocks, and stubbing cigarettes onto the skin. Again, something which we've seen a lot of in Syria and in Lebanon, in Jordan. So there's a question of how and why is this happening? There's studies of this that some say a lot of it is gratification, that the perpetrator gets some kind of pleasure out of this. Think back to Abu Ghraib. Do you remember those images you've seen of the US personnel grinning, taking pictures of themselves, laughing at piles of naked detainees around them? We've seen very large numbers of images like this of what Israelis are doing to Palestinians. Lots of that, I believe, comes out of widespread and long-lasting dehumanization and racism against Palestinians, who are called monsters, scum, 2-legged beasts, cockroaches, human animals, during the last 6 months and previously. There's an enormous culture of impunity for such torture. It's condoned, we can only believe, at the highest levels. Almost no one is ever investigated, and almost no one is ever prosecuted. One other purpose is, as mentioned, is to coerce confessions out of the detainee. And here it's very important to always have in your head confessions, inverted commas. It's very clear in international law, and in most countries domestic law, that a confession extracted under duress must never, ever be counted as evidence in any legal proceedings, except as possible evidence to convict the perpetrator and the person who told them to do it or condoned it for that abuse. It's been happening over the last 6 months and previously. UNRWA, UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians, many staff members said that they were tortured by Israeli officials to confess, in inverted commas, to being somehow linked to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or being involved in October 7th activities. There's also a dreadful video, which had never, ever been shared by the Israelis, well, I say that's Israeli state, of a coerced confession of someone called Manar Qasim, who is made to say that he was a member of Islamic Jihad and he took part in the rape of an Israeli woman. You can see online that there's a lot of doubt being made about that alleged confession. Lots of the details don't add up. There's very poor translation of what he said. And despite this having supposedly been extracted in December, there's been no identification of the alleged victim. Now, this is something which we saw lots of in Syria. Pro-democracy activists, people who are killed by the regime, often their family members or they themselves were made to, inverted commas, to confess to being in a terrorist organization, using bombs, etc., to attack the Syrian regime. That is what Israel is doing. We can't pretend that there is never a piece of evidence, or never a piece of truth which could be extracted from via coercion and torture. But remember, as I said, torture is absolutely prohibited in every circumstance internationally. There's an absolute ban. That there are absolutely no circumstances in international law when a state may derogate from its obligations. But that's what we see with Israel now and in the past. So we could talk a bit about what the UK and others, ourselves, what can be doing, but perhaps that's best to leave for the discussion. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope we can help bring extra light on this and help end this absolutely barbaric practice of the Israeli authorities against Palestinians. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Neil, and also that, again, very incredibly harrowing, and some of the details that you went into were chilling. And just to, I mean, I suppose Chair's privilege here in terms of we've talked a little bit of, quite a lot about the dehumanization of Palestinians, and I guess this question for all of you. But in terms of what we're hearing in the last 6 months, in particular, from sort of comments from Ben Gvir, this scum of the earth comment, which and the human animals comment from Gallant. The Ben Gvir's commented actually in the brief that we've sent out, but also what we're seeing in terms of whether it be TikTok videos of Israeli soldiers treating Palestinians and obviously their actions carried out with pride and published with pride as well. Obviously, the dehumanization is nothing new, but how does the current situation how is that sort of shifted, or is what are the sort of has there been in recent months to sort of I guess signify some kind of change or a worsening of the situation, or a worsening of dehumanization? That's open out to all of you. Tala, perhaps?
I'm sorry, Joseph. Can you just repeat your last sentence?
Yeah, no, in terms of obviously how is that sort of dehumanization sort of worsened in the last, how is it sort of manifesting sort of in recent times in terms of the horrific dehumanization, and how is that sort of, is it worse now? How is it worse now? And how are we seeing it in terms of what we're seeing in terms of in Gaza from all sections of Israeli society, whether it be sort of politicians and their dehumanizing remarks to videos that have been put out by IDF soldiers and that and such like?
Yes, just like I said that, yes, things are worse now, of course, and it has become worse because of all the impunity the Israeli occupation enjoys during the past 76 years. Like this would have not happened if the Israeli occupation was actually held accountable for all the previous crimes. So now it is really important that we work together as like different people from different countries in the world to hold the Israeli occupation accountable for the worsening of the situation, for the crimes, the horrible crimes still taking place. And yeah, I saw a question in the chat like regarding the doctors, and yes, everyone is complicit. Israeli doctors who are affiliated with the Israeli Prison Service are complicit in the crimes of torture. Israeli judges are also complicit because they extend the detention of detainees with them knowing that they are subjected to torture and ill treatment. So within all this context, it's really important that within the worsening of the violations and crimes, it's important to finally hold Israel accountable for all its crimes. And like even the ICC is still not doing its work. It's not fulfilling its responsibility towards Israeli officials, because like we've been hearing a lot of statements and announcements from Israeli officials, and in addition to what Neil said, the bragging of Israeli soldiers torturing Palestinians, like we have a clear evidence. The ICC has a clear evidence regarding the torture and ill treatment committed against Palestinian detainees. So the evidence is here. So things have to work faster, you know, regarding holding Israel accountable, because everything is clear now. The statements from Israeli officials, the videos and pictures which Israeli soldiers disseminate along the social media platforms, along their social media platforms, this means they are not afraid of accountability. So this is it, I think.
Thank you, Tala. Does anyone else have any, Miranda, Neil, anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I think Tala covered most everything I was going to say, but I guess the only other thing I'll add is that it does seem quite shocking how clear, I guess, Israeli officials and military officials, and even all the way to the BBC and the New York Times and all of these actors are sort of using dehumanization tactics as a means to manufacture consent to carry out genocide. We've seen, you know, so many of these comments by Israeli officials, you know, then followed by something, some coverage in the media, and then just days later, they're, you know, I think about the Flower Massacre and how that was the first of many, or the attack of the Israeli bombing of El Ahi Baptist Hospital, and how that was a test, really, to see if Israeli forces could sort of get away with it. And then, you know, they've attacked every hospital in Gaza since. So yeah, I think, you know, this is something that has been present for a very, very long time and has been well documented, but I think the clarity and transparency of all of it, I think, is quite shocking to see, like, play out in real time. You know, it's not surprising, but it certainly is still shocking, I think, to see. Yeah.
Thanks, Miranda. Neil, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. So just to add, this is where I think we need to look at ourselves, and at least our government and our politicians, because Palestinians, human rights workers, ourselves were screaming from 7th of October and even earlier about the dehumanization of Palestinians and genocidal intent statements made by Israeli leaders. And we and others relayed these to the government, demanding that they took a responsible line, condemned them themselves, that these are not responsible statements, you need to rein this in, and they refused to do so. You know, Minister Andrew Mitchell in the House was specifically read out some of these and refused to do so, merely saying that Israel has every right to destroy Hamas. So yes, I mean, that kind of like green light, which the UK has given as a, you know, an enabler of human rights abuse and even genocide, is something which we really must do our best to aim for, to tackle.
Thanks, Neil. We had a question in the chat actually from Vina. I don't know, Vina, if you wanted to ask your question yourself, or you want me to read it out for you. I can read it out. She sort of asked this: if I understand correctly, much of the torture information is released by Israeli authorities themselves. This and regarding children and the elderly, what are the mechanisms which currently allow the Israelis to get away with this so far?
Maybe I wasn't clear. The information is published within the Israeli media, not the Israeli authorities, like as the official authorities. So it's only from the Israeli media. But of course, they are like they take all the information from the Israeli authorities. So they are giving, and they not actually the information, but they are allowing Israeli writers, for example, or publishers to be aware of the situation inside these military camps. So this is the case. And what was the second part of the question? Yeah, as I mentioned, that like because they enjoy the culture of impunity, this is why they are continuing with committing all these crimes against Palestinians. Like this is the only reason.
Right. Hello. Sorry. Thank you. Can you hear me? It's Vina here. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No, thank you very much for clarifying that it's from the media. But I think, Neil, also you had clarified the way that, you know, the complicit governments are navigating around or managing to navigate around avoiding what seems to me really obvious human rights, or just all of those considerations. So I suppose what I'm thinking is that it's the response of pressure against those governments, which is called for now, to just make visible what is actually should be obvious, but they're managing to avoid. That's my reading of, you know, the current situation. I don't know if other people agree.
Do you have any response to that from any of the speakers?
I'll make a quick comment. I guess it talks to the UK. But yeah, I mean, what, you know, ourselves, Joe and colleagues, and some human rights friendly MPs will be working towards is helping raise awareness of this amongst parliamentarians and the government. What we'd like to see the government do is to publicly condemn so many authoritative reports of torture, systematic torture, including of children, and to be identifying the steps which Israel must be taking now. We've outlined half a dozen of those in the two-page briefer, which War and Want and Caabu put together. But yes, we look forward to having an extra campaign in addition to what Tala shared earlier, where we can be pushing for those actions to be taken, because the UK, of course, repeatedly says that it's a close ally of Israel, you know, and it is militarily, diplomatically, economically, and yet we see patterns of behaviour over a long period of time, which are very much akin, and I don't say this lightly, to not only the Syrian regime, which is one of the worst perpetrators of torture on the planet, but ISIS. You know, looking at exposing people in cages to the elements, the rape, the attacking with dogs, and so on. You know, the metal instrument I mentioned. This is absolutely depraved, and I think we need to shame UK government, parliamentarians, and, you know, business leaders who ally one way or the other with Israel to help ensure that there's a change.
Thanks, Neil. Derek, did you have a question? Derek Summerfield? You need to unmute yourself. Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just
No
first,
problem.
can you hear me? First about dehumanization, it's extraordinary over here that even The Guardian and the London Review of Books, writing about events after October the 7th, talked about the Israelis who were killed and who were murdered and the Palestinians who were killed. It seems to be impossible to murder a Palestinian, yeah? Just like you don't murder a dog. And that's over here. I think, you know, one can be furious about Israel, but in some way I've got even more disgust for the UK state and the US and the EU have been the real enablers of impunity. You don't mind impunity within Israel. But the only reason I'm speaking is that our problem is that we have a wealth of evidence, and we can see that when you know, I've been involved in anti-torture work in particular, going for the Israeli Medical Association and Israeli doctors for 20 years. There is a mountain of evidence, and it's all over the place. It's gathered, it's sent to the appropriate places like the World Medical Association, but they will not act against Israel. In other words, if the evidence runs the wrong way, it's as light as a feather. So we have mountains of evidence now, and as ever, our problem is to make it count, given the deep complicity that you see in the Western order. I mean, the Guardian will only write within certain boundaries. I mean, everything is disgusting. Yeah? How do we make evidence count, and how do we bring, for me, the Israeli medical establishment to some sort of reckoning? We're trying to go after the 100 Israeli doctors who called publicly with their names for hospitals to be bombed as a start. But of course, the real culprit on the medical side is the Israeli Medical Association, which is essentially part of is a shield of the state, which they say themselves, where the members of the IDF are on the board. So our problem is not with evidence, but what we do, how we can make evidence count. This is a huge question. No other human rights campaign is the same as Israel, and never has been.
Thanks, Derek. Any of the speakers want to come back on any of that?
No, just to say,
the Labour Party is virtually an official of the Israeli state. Essentially, it's functioning as an official. Everything, you know, Starmer. Everything is disgusting. And what do we do about that? I mean, the Labour Party have looked at the trouble they've gone to get any anti-Israel voices out of the party. Huh? So where do we stand on that? Sorry, that's all.
Neil, were you just about to come in there?
I was just to say, I hear Derek and agree with what he said. I also wanted to potentially take the liberty, if it's okay, if you can nod or not, to respond partly to a query where someone's raised the ICJ, because I think this is a very significant aspect when we look at accountability. And to highlight, first of all, in the 84-page submission of South Africa, they do refer to torture. They give some well-documented examples of it. And if anyone who's looked at it, it's an incredible document. It's very, very well researched and presented and argued. The judges themselves didn't spend much time considering that, but they have talked about how, I mean, torture constitutes a significant element of causing serious physical and mental harm to the affected people, the Palestinians of Gaza here. And if you have the chance to read it, haven't already, the latest report by the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, the Occupied Palestinian Territory, Anatomy of a Genocide. And remember, this is basically the UN's highest level independent expert on human rights for Palestine. She goes a lot further and documents wider levels of torture, which aren't in the 84-page briefing, some of which will overlap with the document we put together, information in there. And this is exactly, and she argues that because there's 3 of the 5 genocidal acts which are taking place, constituting a genocide, and torture is a big part of that. So yes, there is scope for serious international accountability mechanisms through the ICJ being applied against the Israeli senior government and military officials. And yes, in kind of parallel, the ICC, of course, has an open brief on war crimes and other offences under the Rome Statute of the ICC, and can also investigate and prosecute perpetrators through that. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. I think there's some questions over on YouTube actually, which were about, and I think this relates in terms of what can we do in terms of in the UK with politicians, but what can people across the world, sorry, just scroll down again, but what can people across the world do to change the situation? And also, I think more specifically, what I mean, I suppose particularly from our colleagues at Addameer and DCI, what should we, people like myself and Neil and others working in this space, what should we be saying to politicians that, obviously it's one of those things that, it feels often that we've said exactly what we need to say and everything we've said, and we've been screaming it for years and years, and certainly in the last 6 months especially. But what would you like us to be doing and pushing further on, and also what can people be doing globally to help with this?
Yes, at first it's important for everyone to put pressure on the government, like on your government, regarding selling arms and aiding the genocide and the crimes committed against Palestinian prisoners. And this can be done in different ways. And of course, you know better as British what are the best ways to do that. This is first thing. The second thing is shedding light on the most important crimes, let's say, like regarding prisoners, the torture and ill treatment and enforced disappearance, and and administrative detention, because some issues are really hard for everyone to say, no, this is not a crime. All the bragging about the torture, showing all these videos and all the public statements from Israeli officials. This is important to show for everyone in order to convince everyone that these are real crimes and they have to stop. So we think it's really important to push our governments in order to boycott this. I know the situation is different in the UK than in different other countries, but you can make a difference. I'm sure you can make a difference in putting pressure on the government to stop aiding the Israeli occupation, stop selling weapons. And so this is at first place. Second thing is raising awareness. And it's important to get the information from a professional organization, let's say, just like you are doing now, listening to different Palestinian organizations, because we have the information and we try to raise awareness regarding this issue. So you also have to spread the word and raise awareness, especially for young people, especially for students, for example, in universities, conducting all these webinars, all these meetings with students, with activists, with different solidarity campaigns. This is really important and has its impact. We at Addameer, we decided to now put more effort with the people of the world, more than what we put on the governments or the countries, because we've been working for that long and we've seen nothing. The genocide is still taking place for 6 months. They didn't do anything. So it's really important to have the people around us to be aware of the situation, of the exact situation in Palestine, and doing all this will actually make a difference in the narrative, and in the activities someone may want to do. So yes, it's important, and it differs from one country to another. So regarding, of course, the policy of this particular country. So we as Palestinian organizations are always ready to provide information, to provide anything anyone wants regarding raising awareness on Palestinians or Palestinian political prisoners or any matter else. So we are ready to engage and be a part of any movement anyone is planning to do regarding and to take part in stopping and immediately stopping this genocide taking place. And this will be done, I think, from the people of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Tala. I just wondering whether there are any sort of final comments from either Miranda or Neil, because we have to, I think then we'll wrap up. Miranda, Neil, any sort of final words from you?
No, I would just like to salute again our colleagues in Addameer and DCI Palestine, Addameer and elsewhere, other human rights organizations in Palestine and Israel who do this incredible work in incredibly difficult circumstances, and with not enough. I mean, we know there's an enormous amount of international public support, but it doesn't always carry that weight at governmental level, at least, you know, where we're sitting. So strength to all of them to continue, and to please look out for what War and Want, and I think Caabu would hopefully put some actions together, you know, in coming days and weeks to help put extra pressure on at least our government on this, to try to rid Israel of this appalling practice, which it's been carrying out for far too long, and to possibly, hopefully, save some Palestinian lives and well-being in that too.
Thanks, Neil. Anything from you, Miranda?
Just really would like to thank you and Neil and Tala for this very important webinar. And I know it feels hard to focus on just sort of one aspect of everything that we're seeing right now, when, you know, people are being killed faster than ever. And I appreciate you taking the time to organize this event focused on torture, as yeah, this is something that I think is being overshadowed a little bit compared to everything else sometimes. But I really appreciate all of you taking the time to do this.
Thank you. And obviously remains for me to say thank you to both you, Miranda, and Tala and Neil for speaking to us today. And obviously thank you to all the work that organizations like Addameer, like DCI, and so many other Palestinian organizations that are really coming under systemic and systematic threats, you know, clampdowns and attacks, you know, in terms of the work that they're doing. Obviously, it is so important that we continue to amplify Palestinian voices and organizations in, you know, scenarios like this, but also in terms of what we share, information we share, and what we encourage people to see and to witness. And obviously we will, you know, and I think I could speak on behalf of War and Want here as well, but Caabu and War and Want, and, you know, a lot of other organizations working in the space in the UK will continue to do that and continue to play our part in sort of, you know, advancing, you know, such issues, and to making sure that actually we are not contributing also to the dehumanization of Palestinians by refusing to actually give them voices and platforms, and to platform organizations like we've heard from today. Also, I suppose I have to sort of give a small plug for ourselves, both War and Want and Caabu, that if you are so inclined, please do support both of our organizations, and also all the organizations that you've heard from today. We also rely on the support of and generosity of members and friends, you know, in terms of donations or becoming members and such like. So if you do feel that, yeah, you would like to become a Caabu member or donate to War and Want, then please do so. You know, we do require that support also. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you found the session informative and important. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.